think this is just a spreadsheet.
Alright, so I hope you enjoyed that little bit of introduction, because yes, I have had the Polyend Tracker for 12 months now and I've been thoroughly enjoying it, but I thought since things have been evolving and how I've been using the trackers changed over the year, I'll do a bit more of a matured view and sort of talk about what I think makes this device special. And yeah, disclaimer, I did pay for the Polyend Tracker out of my own money and all the other gear you're going to see in this video, so no one's having any financial say of what I'm saying. And secondly, I have been in chats with Polyend, mainly getting specs and what's happening on the inside and just some like other points that I couldn't really find in my research, but they haven't had any say on what I've said in this video, or they haven't seen this video. They're going to be seeing it as soon as you guys are seeing it, so it's going to be interesting. And lastly, I am biased towards trackers. They're my primary way of making music, so I do lean towards trackers a little bit more, but I thought since I have that knowledge, if someone's coming to trackers very new, like they haven't touched them before, talk about ways we can sort of try out the Polyend Tracker without getting one, and then where does the Polyend Tracker sit in the tracker space as well for like more veteran people. So enough talking now, let's get straight into it. We got the Polyend Tracker fired up, and I just wanted to touch base with the form factor itself, because I'm not one for specs or like this number here or that spec there, because really it's a combination of how everything works together that really makes something special. But when I first got it, I was a little bit concerned about the size, because here's an A4 sheet of paper and it's just a little bit smaller than that. And for our American friends, that line is letter paper size. It's just a little bit wider that way. And I was a little bit worried about its portability, like could I use it taking around? Because when I first started making music, I got introduced to electronic music through LSDJ, and really this was my music easel. I'd be on the train, I'll be making my tracks, I could put it away. If I had a free break, I could pull this out and do some more work. And that's how I really got into music making. I really enjoy that, like having spontaneous moments of inspiration and being able to capture it, and really fast as well. That's another thing I really enjoy about trackers, is when you get around that workflow, it can be quite interesting to get things in. And as you probably noticed on my modded Game Boy, I do have the nice silicone buttons. Compared to these ones here, these are quite firm as well, so they're really tactile. When you push down on it, you can sort of get a sense of what's going on. All the other buttons on the device are mechanical, except for the power button. That's a little clicky button. But yeah, these actually feel really nice to work with and quite responsive. You know when you're pressing it. And the dial, which was sort of something, I'm not a big fan of rotary encoders in general on devices, but how they implemented this throughout the tracker, it's actually really cool how it's like a blend between a bunch of different things. And it is quite a large unit, but the height of it, they say 33 mil, but really that's because of the dial. It's actually quite thin compared to my chunky boy Game Boy here. Yeah, it actually feels really nice to work with, like compared to some of the other synths I work on. Like I can actually keep my wrists on it and feel comfortable doing that, and standing up and working over it, or having on a slant as well. It's quite a comfortable device to just have sitting there and working away. As a guy that wears glasses, I really do appreciate quite a large screen and how they've done it as well. It's very like strong colors, high contrast. It's really easy to see what's going on, and it's not like I have to squint and get up close to see what's happening. So it's a really big plus. And that nice matte black finish, like if you catch it in the right light, it does have a really nice appeal. I do have a second generation where it's all aluminium all the way around. I don't have any visuals of the latest version, but really, I do like the look of it. Now, we had a bit of a chat about the hardware. I want to chat a little bit about the software because, like, for one, Tracker Workflow has been around since late 80s, early 90s, and it's been evolving over time. But we're starting to see these hardware trackers pop up. And the Polyend Tracker, like, if you're new to the Tracker Workflow, it might look a bit intimidating as we are going up and down. We can go on here and actually change it so it goes horizontally as well. But once you start understanding how to look at the patterns and how to see the sequences and how the commands are affecting the instruments and all that stuff, Polyend's done a really nice job of making it streamlined in a sense that everything's really quick to access once you start understanding where everything is. And it's got a really nice layout for that. Like if we start working from top to bottom, like master, song, and pattern. So we've got our highest level where we've got like a mixer and things that we want to do on the overall song. We have the song mode, which will allow us to range our song from the patterns. And the patterns are like the granular thing, and then we can start getting right into the nitty gritty and then editing the values here. You have our samples over one side and we have our patterns over the other side. So if we're working on our instruments, we can come into the instrument parameters, say we need to change up a sample, and I'm just going to pick a random one, and I'm like, oh, by the way, I'm running 1.5, so they've added a nice feature that lets me use these to check beat size. Zoom in, maybe, oh, it's not really on point. Just tweak that a bit. I can come back into that one. And it's really quick to get around all the different sections. Another thing that Polyend's done, like when I work with something like LSDJ, it has some nice little features in there where if you double tap, it'll bring up a little bit of description up the top. Polyend's done well as well, where it's given like the title, but it's also given a bit of description and how to actually interact with it. And they've also put in a manual into the system as well. So using that, you can get sort of familiar what things are doing. Like if you hold down note, you'll see all the different notes and you can see the chromatic scales. So these would be your black keys, and then you'll have your white keys as well. And yeah, it's done a really good job. If you hold down instrument, it'll show all the instruments that you've programmed. So, and you can use that to say I wanted to edit the howler. I can go up here and then it'll bring up the howler as well. And about that rotary dial as well, it's interesting because you don't have to use the rotary dial or this to edit things as you go along, because really this is a keyboard, but it's also a way we can edit our values. We can use it to scroll around and say this all goes in this fashion along here, but we can also use the dial to pick our points as well. So you're not locked into only using the keypad or only using the dial. It's sort of like how you want to do it. And also, this isn't just a keypad or a dial, it's also a way we can edit our name. So if I just go into here and just rename, it becomes a full keyboard, and when those two light up here, it references them. And after a while, it becomes pretty quick to write out names. Also, I will mention it does have a really nice auto name buttons. So when you quickly want to rename something, you can hit that button and it'll just give it a new name. So between the hardware and the software, having those features made it really easy for me to get up to speed with the Polyend Tracker and get into using it and trying out different things, because I come from more of a sound engine sort of tracker. So like Fami Tracker, LSDJ, Sunvox, they all got their own way of making sound. But the Polyend Tracker works with samples, so let's get to talking about recording them. So on the Polyend Tracker, we have a few ways of capturing the sound, but we can say we could take out the SD card and then put our samples on there. Here's our line out, so I'm using that to capture what's coming out. We have a line in, which is a sort of instrument level, so there's no gain amplifier on here. We have a microphone in, which is microphone needs gains. We also have our MIDI in and out as well. And the way we can start recording those sounds is going into here. We can see that we've got our ways of recording here. So if we use the line in, we would select line in. If we were using mic, we could have a mic with a low gain or a mic with a high gain. So depending on the type of microphone you have, you would select which one you want. And we have a few options here like gain and monitor, and we hit the record. This does record mono samples. so there's no stereo, and we get about 45 seconds of record time when we hit that button. So when I reviewed this the first time around, I had this really cool idea of like picking this up and having like a little gooseneck microphone at the end, and then being able to point out a sound and record it and then do something with it. I tried it out. Sort of didn't work out the way I was planning, but I did find it really useful to just have a sound recorder on site, because the shorter, like a minute, it's not going to record like a full modular session and then you can spend hours cutting up all the samples and making sample packs out of it. But it's sort of really nice to be able to record a few sounds, bring them into the Polyend Tracker and then mangle them in the sound engine and then work with them, as well as you can capture a large section of the radio, start chopping it up, and 45 seconds is quite a long time. And it's not like 45 seconds, that's it. It's 45 seconds every time you hit that record button. So you can pull in a lot of sounds pretty quick through the device. We can actually sample the radio as well, and I'm going to not go there because that's copyright. Now, there's a feature on the Polyend Tracker that not many people talk about, and that's being able to record internally in the tracker itself. So if I jump into the pattern, I've got this little sound here, but if I modify it a bit, sounds kind of cool, and I want to mangle that, I can use we can select what we want to record. So I just want to record 2 bars of it, and then if we go more, and then if we go to render selection, we'll use that auto name button and render and load. And then if we look here, 14 has that sound that we've got. And then we can start bringing that around, doing some really cool things with it. And now that we're in the sample loader, as I was pointing out before with the SD card, this is the way we pull in samples as well. So I'm just going to go to samples, and we have a whole bunch of different samples from other YouTubers. I created a sample pack to help out with my tutorial series as well. So I can use that and quickly start pulling in a whole bunch of different sounds. And one thing with the Polyend Tracker, we have about 133 seconds of sound data that we can bring into our project. We can double that if we start importing things at low quality, which will give us 266 seconds. 133 seconds on mono samples, which for some might be a bit limiting, and you need to make a decision on that. But with the tracker workflow, there's a different way we start using samples and getting into like those single cycle waveforms and all that sort of stuff. It does work a bit differently, but with the sample we just record, we can bring that into the sample editor, and this is where we can work within our space. We don't need to go off and process our audio in a computer and bring it back in. We can quickly jump in. So in the sample editor, we can test our idea. That actually sounds like a really cool bass line pitched up. But I want to remove that start point, and we do have access to a whole bunch of different effects that we can apply. So things that you would normally want to do. So I'm just going to apply a crop. I'm just going to zoom in and just make sure it's zeroed out. Apply the crop. We have normalize, which is really handy to make sure everything's got the same volume. That could be something itself. What else we got here? So we can apply different effects. So there are some effects in the unit. We have a bit of mastering as well, so we can add some equalizers and EQ compression. This is a very interesting function. What you can do is start mixing a whole bunch of these different samples together that you re-recorded, and then mangle them together, make a mono sample that we turn into a wavetable. Then we can use that wavetable with the wavetable engine. So really cool function. We've got fades out and time stretching and just things that are really useful to have. So now that we have our sample itself, we can start thinking about how we can make it run in the sample engine. And there's a few ways. So we've got 48 instruments here that we can control. So they're also linked up to these buttons as well. So if we use sample playback, these are the different ways we can have our sample playback. So a one shot is just a one shot. We have a few looping functions, so one that moves forward, one that moves back. We have one that ping pongs between the two sides. We have slicing, so if we have all our drum kits lined up, or we have like a sample that we want to chop up, we can use that. We have the wavetable synthesizer, so we've got some really cool sounds we can get out of that. and the granular synthesizer, which we can actually use on the sample to take little granular points of it and bounce around, and really handy stuff. And then the way we automate these sort of sounds is we have the instrument parameter. So this is the major part of the sound engine itself. And we have like a cutoff filter, we can change the resonance. We have a few effects that we can apply. So we have reverb, delay, overdrive. We can change tuning, the panning. And then if we hit the instrument parameters again, we get access to the automation tracks. And when I first saw this, I was like, well, it doesn't seem like as powerful as some of the other sound engines that I work with. Like we only, like if you think of this as a synthesizer, we have like the velocity controlled oscillator, then we have the velocity controlled filter, and then we have the amplifier, and then we have the out. We may have an envelope, or we may have an LFO for the whole synth. But in the Polyend Tracker, each one of this can have an envelope or an LFO on each individual one. So they're not one LFO type. We can have each one having a different LFO or a different envelope depending on what you want. So say with our sound, we could add a really cool maybe saw. I actually really enjoy that, but that's just leaving it verbatim what the LFO is or what the envelope is. And really, we have access to that tracker workflow. So if I was to just play this line here without the bass line, there's actually a lot going on here. So this is that granular synth, and then the little p is the position of that granular synth. So it's actually randomizing the position. And then the big P is the panning. So that's how I'm getting the sway between the left and right channel. And that's where the power of this sample engine is we can inject commands into our sample engine and actually create some really interesting sounds. So we talked about the insides, we talked about the Polyend Tracker. Let's talk about how we can use it to connect with our other gear. And I brought out a lovely little black box in a sec I'll talk about. But with the Polyend Tracker, we do have access to MIDI implementation. So if you go past our 48 instrument, we do have access to 16 channels of MIDI. And you sort of treat it the same way as an instrument, like you give it notes, you give it effects commands. How these effects commands work is you plot in the effects that you want to interact with, and then when you go into the pattern, so if we select this one, we have those MIDI CCs there as well. So we can actually control quite a lot with the sound. And the Polyend Tracker does something really cool. So this little black box is a sound canvas from back in the day, and all your DOS music and MIDI files. This is the thing. And if you ever know about programming one of these things, such a light read. Being such a light read, the Polyend Tracker does some really nice things for us. So if I start scrolling this value here, it's actually doing a live play of what we're going to hear, and we can chain up a whole bunch of these different effects as well. So we can preview what we're doing. So if we had multiple boxes on here and this is your center of your dollar setup, it's a really powerful brain to control everything. And the reason why I like the sound canvas is because you can inject all the MIDI commands in there and we get something like this. Just doing that little bit of a live play, it's more about the tracker workflow, applying it to your other machines. Like we do get this sort of steppy feel, so it gives a little bit extra character to what you're mucking around with. And if you've got like a synthesizer with its envelopes, you could do like an envelope automation of the steps to create like a velocity curve, and then you can control the synth that way, which would have a different character to then just letting the synth do its own thing. So the Polyend Tracker is a really powerful brain for the center of any sort of setup. I'm just going to unplug everything and rearrange it because there's another thing I wanted to talk about. All right, I'm just going to shimmy this to the side here. All right, I'm just going to do, cool. Now the Polyend Tracker has a really nice way of playing live. And if I just quickly jump into performance mode, this is the way that we can start interacting with the actual song data. So if I just track 3, I'm going to hit play. It gives us a really interesting way of just adding flavor to the song that we just wrote. So it's like, here's a pattern that we're going to play through, and then we got ways that we can have all our songs positioned. So if I just go File and Open, here's all the songs that I've written so far, and you can store about 100 songs in here. And same with, you could have 100 songs on this one. So if you're in a live setting or you have all the like music that you set up, there's a really interesting way of playing between two and bouncing back and forth. Because back in the day with LSDJ, I would have one Game Boy playing, and then this Game Boy over here is loading, and then I use the crossfade to bounce between the two. But say if I've got a song that's coming up that's a bit louder than the other one, we have ways that we can, so if I just hit master and hold, that automatically allows me to change the volume here. So if I'm in the pattern, I can do that and let go, and it goes straight back to where I was. So it's a really nice way of adjusting things on the fly. And then with, say I want to do a tempo change, so I know this is in a higher tempo than the one over here, I can hold this, and then as the song is playing through and coming to an end, I can start scrolling down and then go crossfade into this one and start playing that. So we'll just get rid of that stuff and bring this back to the center, because really I'm enjoying the tracker that much that I think this would be a really nice way for me to play live. Like with the two LSDJs, it could be one Polyend Tracker with LSDJ, one Polyend Tracker with something else, and then being able to mix between the two. Or I might get a second one, I don't know yet. I just find they've done a lot of time-saving things on the device that make it so you're just interacting with the sound and not having to deal with the menu. So I really enjoy that about the tracker as well. Now, I've got the Polyend powered down because I wanted to talk about its portability, and I've got everything packed up just to show how I run making this thing portable, because really this thing hasn't left my side and it's been with me everywhere. It's been on trips, it's been on the plane, on the train as well, into the office. I rarely take this out of my backpack, it just lives in there. And yeah, even if it doesn't have an internal battery or speakers or anything, there was a few things I sort of tested out and tried, and I come up to the site, really good point where I've got down to 2 cases. So I'm just going to move this aside for a sec. And the first case I got was their proprietary case, just because I knew I wanted to take this thing around, and it has been a bit of a lifesaver having it. And one thing I really enjoy is how snugly the Polyend sits in this cavity. Like, it takes a little bit of effort to get it seated in there, so it just means when you go about, it's not going to come out. And really, they've done a good design job up here as well. So it's got little protection bits to, so jog wheel, you're not going to bounce that and that, and it just gave me a bit of peace of mind. The only thing I found is, like, because it has been living in my backpack this whole time, it's got a nice zipper too. Because it's been living in my backpack, I've noticed that the top has dished a bit. But having a look inside here, there is actually a massive air gap as well. So it does protect, like if there's a hard hit or if you drop it. I have dropped this a couple of times and scared myself a little bit, but it has protected the unit really well. And there's a lot of air, and it stops something from like pushing through and then inside pushing through one of those points here and then forcing it into the screen or your buttons or whatever. So it does really good job protection. And I did keep the nice little felt cover and usually wrap it up when it goes to sleep. So that's the first case. So I'm just going to put that to the side. Now the second case I sort of stumbled upon because I was having a pencil case with all the cables for the Polyend Tracker. And usually this is my Audio Technica M70. So these are nothing that you have to get, but I found this really useful because it comes with its own case here. I've taken all the cables that were for the headset, moved that to the pencil case, and then I just keep the 3.5mm jack on there. And this is predominantly the headset I use when I'm going around. And like when I'm at work, I use these for monitoring what I'm doing. And yeah, because I've got the Polyend Tracker with me as well, that works with the Polyend Tracker as well. 10,000 milliamp battery. I've gone through a few of these to try and find a good one, and I find smaller is better just because they're easy to handle. But using something like this, I usually knock about 10% off in like a session. So usually I play for maybe 30 minutes to an hour. So it lasts quite long for a few sessions before you have to charge it again. So that's really handy for me. And then because it did come with this case here, it actually turned out to be really handy for storing everything. So I've got the power supply, which is Polyend's just normal one, the cable that came from Polyend, and really when I'm on the plane and that, I can use that to power the Polyend Tracker. I keep two 3.5 male-to-male jacks, and I think they're 6 feet. They're not close to 2 meters, but they're quite long. But I have two of them. The other one is currently being used to run audio to the camera. So yeah, but really handy having two. So you have one coming in and then you have one coming out. So if I've got the field recorder, which I'm currently using as well, you can start linking it to things. So if you've got something that you want to sample or you are outputting to something else, it's really handy having two. And then I keep the proprietary cables that came with Polyend in there as well, because it's like when you're connecting it to other things. I've had a few sessions where I brought the Polyend Tracker along and just godsend to be able to connect it up to a bunch of different things, and that's the MIDI. All of this just sits pretty snugly in this case, and when I'm running around, it actually sits something like that, because I usually have the battery in there, so it's a little bit more inconspicuous. Keep that. Headphones for work. At lunchtime I usually bring out the Polyend Tracker, but really I have two cases that I will take, and for a form factor, like, it does add a bit of extra size to the Polyend Tracker, but it's just that peace of mind knowing that it's not going to get damaged. Alright, I just wanted to show you as well, like, there's the Polyend Tracker, and this is how I usually roll with my typical setup. So I've got Renoise in the center, and my studio monitors. I have my nice Keylab Mark II. I've got a couple of effects in my patch bay, and allows me to route everything around into here. But really, all these things I can access on the Polyend Tracker itself, and being two cases, I can just take that and go. Like, I do have a nice powerful PC down there because I do a lot of rendering, but this allows me to get out of this room and just go about my day. So we come to the point where I'm going to give a bit of my opinion, and as it is my opinion, so you take it with a grain of salt. But this is for what I've found with having the Polyend Tracker for the last year, and the biggest one for me and the biggest value add is how fast I can get something put into the Tracker workflow. It takes a bit to get into Tracker workflow and the Polyend Tracker, but for me it's been a really inspirational machine where I can just plonk this out, and then in a couple of minutes I can have something working. And just to actually demo it, I'm going to challenge myself and see how fast I can build something. Alright, so stop the clock, and I've got something together, and this is just something real quick, but we use that new sound that we made during this tutorial, and yeah. And getting to this point, we can start really fleshing something out, and it only took like 3 minutes of turning it on and getting it out there, and that's something I really enjoy with the Tracker. And it's not only just plotting stuff in, like being able to record the samples, bring in other samples, being able to manipulate them in ways to create something new. It's really inspiring for me, because when I don't have time, I always seem to lose out on my music making, and having something where it's just there, or I can pull out when I have like a free 5 minutes, allows me to get that little bit of music time in when I can. And then on the flip side, I can actually sit down for like an hour or two and have a really nice song fleshed out and ready to go. So that's one big thing I wanted to highlight for myself, is as a way for time poor people, this has really helped me out. I've recorded out actually a few of these samples to use. Like if you know about my second channel, I've used it to create that little block sound, because one of the songs I did, I used all my woodworking equipment to make music, and I pulled a few of those samples and just made like a little ear con, and literally that took 5 minutes. And really this has given me a very different perspective on sample engines, because I just used them to do one shots and fire things off, and really this type of machine here allowed me to treat it not as just a sample but as an oscillator source. So being able to record stuff in, mangle it up into the tracker workflow or with this sound engine, re-record that and then start mucking around with it again. And it's like I have something that I started with, but it's completely changed by the end of it, and it's just given me a much deeper understanding of how powerful sample engines are. And really, like the first thing I used to do with the Polyend Tracker was make single cycle waveforms, because LSDJ, I like working small, and it sounds very basic at the start, but it gave me a few options to be able to control what's going on here. Like I had it so I could hold down values and scroll, as you saw in the little video, and that was the actual inspiration for this track, just making this little single cycle. I was like, hey, well, that actually sounds really cool when it's got some. So it gave me a very versatile instrument to play with, and yeah, it's very expressive as well. So learning how to set up the different instrument parameters so we can actually create some more expressive stuff really elevated the way I thought about samples. And we're not limited to one way of playing with samples. Like this is the chord, but also with my drums, because of 1.5 now that we can save our instruments, I've started moving into this workflow where I put all my sort of useful sounds in one kit, and then I can layer extra samples on as one shots in the instrument parameters. So you're going to see more of these like drum instruments from me. Yeah, so this was the other section of the drums where I'd lay over the top, so just blending two of these instruments together. So only two instruments, but I had a whole bunch of sounds to play with. And yeah, it's not constrained to one way of playing. And really that comes to the last big point, is how malleable this machine is. Like for me, I have my way of working. I like doing things with more tracker workflow where I start mangling things in the pattern view, applying effects and commands to play it. But someone else might just enjoy that one-shot workflow where you treat it more like a sequencer. Or if someone's a DAWless person, they want a brain that controls everything from one point, and then they can start using this to perform and send out the commands to everything else. So this is not just one limited machine. It's not just a tracker. It's a whole different way of making music. And Polyend's done a really good job of making this whole thing accessible to anyone that wants to approach it from whatever music platform they're coming in. Even if they haven't experienced the tracker workflow, they're going to get something out of this machine. Now, I really do enjoy the tracker, and it is a fantastic machine, but there are some things that I'm a bit and there's some limitations to it. And with limitations, like when I have a look online and see what people are seeing, it's like, oh, it's only got 8 tracks, or it only has this much sample time, it's only got mono sounds, and they might be things for people, but I think that's more coming from seeing a tracker, seeing that it only has 8 tracks, and sort of getting around the idea of what a tracker can do. Because like that intro song that I've got here, it's only done in 4 tracks, and really I'm doing a lot of fancy stuff. So it's like flipping instruments, like actually it's one instrument now where I'm flipping between the slices. Got layering. And then after live playing elements, we've got that arpeggio. And that might seem limited to some, but it's like for this song, that's all I felt it really needed. And then if I felt I wanted to extend it further, I had a full extra 8 tracks. So if anyone knows about LSDJ, it really only has 4 tracks. So when I came and got the Polyend Tracker, I was like, oh, sweet, I got like a whole extra Game Boy to play with. Those type of limitations I sort of wanted to help out, and that's the main reason why I made that tracker series, to help out with just the tracker workflow and how it works on the Polyend Tracker and how we can use some of those old techniques and bring it onto the device to make something that's really nice and neat. So you're not limited by the actual device, it's more about your creativity applying it. But things like, for me, is like coming from a chiptune background, I want to be able to access a whole bunch of these commands. I could change the amount, but there's not enough commands to make the whole device work around. But those limitations change how I interact with the machine. So I can, if I need to do specific things, like if I go to my sample loader, I've got 3 of the same sample here, but they do different things. So if I...
Do you think the spreadsheet? Do you think this is just a spreadsheet?
So with those 3 instruments, they're the same sample, but I've chopped up certain sections because the Polyend Tracker doesn't do a certain thing a certain way. So I found a figure out to get around to do what I wanted to do. So those things can be a bit jarring, but finding those workarounds could create a happy accident that turns into something else. Another thing is I've really been enjoying trying to make these automation curves inside the Polyend Tracker. It's a feature that I use quite a lot in Renoise where I can animate a value, but using the actual LFOs to create the type of automation I'm looking for. Like, we have access to a whole bunch of different things in the automation curve. Like, we can change the shape, we can change the speed, change the amount, but it would be nice to have something where I can change the phase, so I can jump between one phase and then go into the other phase in the same effect. But really that comes down to how I want to play. Like, I could re-record this as a sample itself, cut off the initial phase of that oscillation, and then apply it into the Polyend Tracker. So there's ways that we can get around certain things. So those sort of limitations really are just my personal opinion, because they've built a device that sort of targets everyone. And I have been, like, when I first got the Polyend Tracker, I think I was using 1.2, if I just jump in here. So I was using 1.2, so that was really limited with some of the effects. Like, there weren't arpeggios, there weren't ways to add glides or slides ups and downs. And I found myself bouncing between using the Polyend Tracker and then using Renoise for the majority of the work. But as the it went through, like, I've been testing out some of the betas, because 1.4 is when they had the arpeggiator and a few other commands, and adding extra commands like 1.5 now. I've been trying out 1.6, the beta, so giving a few bits of feedback there. But it's become this device in itself where I can use this to make a track, and I'm very happy with the end result, and I don't feel constrained in any way, like I can't do something. It's always got a way to do the thing. It's just how we think about the tracker workflow. And for some, that could be a deal breaker. My programmer mind just starts going crazy and enjoying what is there. So for me, I've really enjoyed that type of limitation where it's like it creates these new ways of doing things, which in turn creates some way of improving the sound that I've done. Now, another thing I wanted to touch about was, like, with the screen itself, it's not really an issue because I don't really plan to play outside in direct sunlight, but it does get hard to see when you get into extreme brightness. And with the screen, like, the screen right now is on its highest setting, and if I were to crank up my nice little light here, you'll see it gets pretty bright. On camera, it's doing a really good job to see it, but now I have to, like, lean over and directly look at the screen, and really that's too bright. I'm going to turn that down. Playing live in the sun might be a bit hard, but everywhere else it's perfectly fine. But that's just one thing, and in Australia you really don't want to be playing out in the sun. It's slip, slop and slap, buddy. So me being OCD about my gear and trying to keep it as good as Nick as long as possible, over the last year under heavy use, it's definitely held up quite well. There's no scratches on the device. The coating's pretty resilient. Mind you, I'm not trying to scratch it anyway. That's why I have the case, and the case done a really good job about that. But one thing I have noticed, because I pretty much sit like this when I'm working and I have my fingers on these 3 buttons, same with keyboards, usually because I'm always working with 3D modeling. Control S is my favorite command. Pretty much those 2 buttons end up worn off for me, and I've noticed a slight bit of wearing on these 3 keys from my fingers being there. And it's not a complaint. I do expect this to start looking well used and having a nice little story to have, especially with brassing on like old cameras. That's if you're not familiar with that term, it does add a patina. It's all like battle scars and just adds a nice little flavour to it. Yeah, but that's the only real thing I've noticed with the actual Polyend Tracker is, for me, those buttons are worn off. I've seen somewhere the arrow keys here are completely gone. So people are definitely getting their money's worth out of the device if they're doing that. So yeah, and that's really, I feel it's just being extremely petty on the device. I really enjoy it. I've had a lot of fun making music with it. So what do I think overall? I think the Polyend Tracker, just how much Polyend has supported this machine since its release and made alterations and built a really nice device that I reckon it's going to age like a fine wine. I definitely don't see myself stopping using it anytime soon. And continual support and growth, it's going to turn into something quite special. Like LSDJ, it was developed over years and like it's supported by the mate, taking on that and then developing it further. So I can definitely see the Polyend Tracker going in a route where it just continually evolves into something that's really special. Now, is the tracker right for you? Because that's going to be a question for yourself and where you feel like, because some people might never have touched a tracker before in their life, to someone that's a veteran and having some knowledge of trackers and where I feel this is going to sit in might not be good for your gas, but I thought let's give it a bit of a description. So if you're really interested in the Polyend Tracker and you're worried about the workflow, if you go and gel well with trackers itself, like I know that feeling because I actually own a Digitone and everyone raves about the electron workflow and the conditional trigs, and it's really cool. It's actually got some design philosophy from trackers, but if you want to actually give it an actual shot, you either need to borrow one from a friend, or for me, I found a secondhand unit that I still paid a fairly decent price for. And when I got it, I quickly realized it actually feels a lot like Nanoloop, which for me, a lot of peace of mind. I was like, sweet, I actually enjoy this box. Really nice FM stuff here. But with the tracker workflow, it's actually got a really nice history to it, and I will leave a link up above to a really nice YouTube video that goes over the history of these devices, because it's actually interesting to see how they came about. And that being said, because they were in this sort of demo scene and people using them for a whole bunch of different things, there's a lot of versions out there that you can actually get your hands on for free and give the tracker workflow a shot. So what I might do, so it's not in the video, I'll leave a list down below of potential trackers you could give a shot at. If I missed any, please leave a comment that you feel that people get their hands on. Like the big ones I like using are Sunvox and Renoise. I find them really cool on the computer. They're cross-platform, so you can have them on Mac and Windows. So really easily accessible. Renoise is a paid one, but you can get the free to have a play around. Now, if you got a sense of trackers and you want to get into your first tracker, like maybe you've come into this through LSDJ and you're really eyeballing off Mate. 3D budget's a little bit low at the moment. So, but they're kind of different machines. So the Polyend has a way of working. Actually, it'd be easier if I go into LSDJ. These sort of handheld tracker workflows. So you got NerdSect, you have the Mate, you have LSDJ, Pulsar, which is on the NES. They have this sort of segmented workflow where, because of the button constraints of it's a Game Boy, so we only got a few buttons to work with, but they managed to do a really good job of implementing this into here. Now, if I use select, I can start navigating down into the different views. So if I go into the chain and then you have a phrase that has nothing in it, so we'll pick a different one and then we go in here. We can see our commands here. And then if I go up and down, we can start editing notes and we can see what's going on. But as you can see, we can only see a very minute snapshot of what's going on the tracker itself, compared to the Polyend, where we have all these buttons. We literally have a 4-octave keyboard on the front panel. We have a bunch of commands, and we can do things like, we're only seeing 4 tracks at the moment, but we can hit note and to see all the information across all our tracks for note. If we press 2 buttons, we can see note and something else, and that's independent of what's going on as well. So that itself, the Polyend Tracker is different to how the Mate works, and I've been really enjoying the Polyend Tracker workflow, mainly because I'm working a lot at desks, whereas if you're always on the go, you might be more inclined to go down the route of a handheld tracker so you don't have places to put down. But I've been limited by desk space because this can sit on my lap and I can do a whole bunch of different things. So really it's down to that workflow mindset. And what pushed me towards the Polyend Tracker is I've already have LSDJ. That is my sort of handheld music thing. I wanted to try something else, and I was pretty happy with that choice. And on that note, it does behave more like Pro Tracker or Octament Tracker as well. So that sort of more old school way of sampling using a tracker. It's more about the sample engine, but Polyend's done their own interpretation on that. So it is in itself its own thing, and we can use it actually to export IT files. So instead of the mod file, we got a bit more data that we can send out. And yeah, I found that useful in some ways, but all the different export options as well. Like usually I'm just predominantly doing everything on the tracker, exporting it out, and then doing a final levels check just to make sure everything's okay before I put it out online and anything. And that's one thing I really enjoy about the Polyend Tracker is how self-complete it is. Like all you really need to do is start getting samples into there, and you can start making whatever you want and make songs and have fun just doing it. So definitely worth giving a look. If you ever have the opportunity to play one, definitely have a look and see if you can make something with it. All right, so as you probably could tell from the video, I do enjoy my Polyend Tracker. It's definitely been that thing that I can just get ideas down and really have a lot of fun. So, and you probably noticed that with all my videos, it's usually featured in majority of them for the last year. So yeah, I probably need to start paying attention to my other babies over here. But yeah, it's definitely been a lot of fun. And in Australia, I did pay $1,100 for this machine. We do love paying nice beach tax on all our lovely devices. So, but looking at American price, it's about 600 USD. So it's a little bit pricier for a synthesizer, but the value that you get and the versatility that you get out of this thing is well beyond what you're paying for it. Now, if you think this is going to help someone else make a decision, definitely give it that thumbs up because it'll help the algorithm to point it to other people. And yeah, I've really enjoyed making this video, like especially that introduction video. I do enjoy that type of product photography and just trying to make things look a little bit nice and sort of blending that with like what is the Polyend capable or whatever machine I do a review on. So you probably see a lot more of these in the future. So if you want to stick around, or if you think I've earned you a subscription, definitely hit that subscribe button. I wouldn't mind seeing you around here more often. And yeah, it's definitely been a lot of fun. So I hope to see you next time.